Imagine a place where the morning fog doesn't just sit on the water. It weaves through stands of ancient pine and clings to the jagged edges of a continent. Where the Atlantic Ocean doesn't merely meet the shore, but carves it, battering pink granite ledges until they smooth into giants, and where the tides are so powerful you can hear the displacement of the sea, a low, rhythmic growl that sounds like the earth itself breathing. This is Maine. Stretching across the northeasternmost tip of the United States, Maine is a landscape defined by the relentless tension between stone and salt. It is a place of deep, boreal silences and sudden, screaming gales. To look at a map of this coastline is to see a shattered mirror. Thousands of islands, narrow finger peninsulas, and hidden reaches where the water mirrors a sky that feels closer than it does anywhere else on the eastern seaboard. Long before the first European sails appeared on the horizon in the early 1600s, this was and remains the homeland of the Wabanaki Confederacy, the people of the Dawnland. For the Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, Micmac, and Maliseet nations, this land was never a frontier to be conquered, but a sacred geography shaped by the Great Spirit, Gluskaba. They knew these rivers when they ran thick with salmon, and these forests when the white pines grew so tall they seemed to hold up the stars. Today, Maine is a state of nearly 1.4 million people, yet it retains a character of profound isolation. It is a place where hardy isn't a compliment, but a requirement for survival. From the brick-lined harbor of Portland to the wind-whipped summit of Mount Katahdin, the spirit of this place is grounded in the work of the hands, the hauling of traps, the felling of timber, and the quiet endurance of winters that turn the soil to iron. You're watching Era Trails, the channel where we slow down, look closer, and chase the why behind the view. If you find value in journeys that prioritize the marrow of a place over the highlights, hit like, subscribe, and stay with us. It helps this series grow, and it tells us you're ready to go deeper into the wild. For this documentary, we are following the Northeast Crawl, a route that mirrors the movement of the glaciers that retreated 12,000 years ago. We begin in the south at the floral cliffs of Ogunquit, moving through the granite sentinels of Casco Bay and the Midcoast before turning inland. We will follow the pulse of the Penobscot River up into the North Woods, through the prehistoric flint of Moosehead Lake, finally ending our journey at the spiritual terminus of the Appalachian Trail, the high, lonely peaks of Baxter State Park. This is not just a road trip, it is a study of deep time, salt spray, and the enduring silence of the North. Pack your layers. The air is turning crisp, and the trail is open. The air in southern Maine carries a specific weight, a dense, saline humidity that feels like a physical presence against the skin. As you arrive in Ogunquit, the scent of the Atlantic Ocean is the first thing to greet you, sharp with the tang of drying kelp and the underlying sweetness of the surrounding marshlands. It is a cooling, restorative atmosphere, even in the height of midsummer, where the temperature often drops 10 degrees the moment you step within sight of the surf. Long before it was a retreat for the weary, this stretch of coastline was known to the Wabanaki as Ogunquit, a name that translates roughly to beautiful place by the sea. For the Abenaki people, this was a vital edge of the world, a place where the shifting sands of the barrier beaches met the stubborn resilience of the rock. To stand here is to stand on the margin, the literal boundary where the continent yields to the abyss. The first impression of Ogunquit is defined by the Marginal Way, a 1.25-mile public footpath that acts as a front-row seat to a geological drama 500 million years in the making. As you step onto the paved trail, the sound of the town fades, replaced by the rhythmic percussive thrum of the tide hitting the Kittery Formation. This bedrock, consisting of dark, silty phyllite and tan quartzite, was once mud and sand at the bottom of an ancient ocean basin during the Silurian period, roughly 440 million years ago. Walking the path, you can see the visible scars of deep time. The rocks are not uniform. They are shot through with dramatic dark ribbons known as diabase dikes. These are volcanic intrusions, molten magma that forced its way into cracks in the sedimentary crust 200 million years ago as the supercontinent Pangaea began to tear itself apart, birthing the Atlantic Ocean. The texture of the stone beneath your boots is rough and ancient, smoothed only where the glaciers of the late Pleistocene scraped across them 20,000 years ago, leaving behind chilled margins and polished surfaces that still catch the morning light. At Devil's Kitchen, a deep indentation in the cliffs where the waves churn into a frothing white lather, the sensory experience reaches its peak. The sound here is a low-frequency roar that vibrates in the chest, accompanied by a fine, cold mist that settles on the lips. To the left, the Josias River creates a small estuary, adding the softer, tea-colored scent of fresh water to the salt spray. It is a landscape of constant motion and profound stillness, a place where the pulse of the planet is impossible to ignore. As you move further along the path, the geology of the Kittery Formation begins to soften, transitioning from the raw, jagged edges of the cliffs into the more sheltered environment of the Perkins Cove Harbor. The sound of the open Atlantic, a constant, heavy thrum, is replaced by the rhythmic clanking of aluminum lobster traps and the high-pitched cries of herring gulls, Larus argentatus, circling the returning boats. The temperature rises slightly here, shielded from the direct sea gale, and the air takes on a heavy, oily scent of diesel mixed with the briny, metallic aroma of fresh shellfish. The history of this cove is a transition from survival to aesthetics. Long before the tourists arrived, this was a working fishing village, but by the late 1800s, the light of the Maine coast began to draw a different kind of inhabitant. In 1898, artist Charles Woodbury established an art school here, marking the birth of the Ogunquit art colony. The culture of this stop is found in the intersection of the rugged and the refined. You can still see the Perkins Cove Manual Pedestrian Bridge, a unique double-leaf drawbridge built in the 1940s. It is one of the few of its kind in the world, operated by a simple button that allows the masts of tall sailboats to pass into the safety of the inner basin. Standing on this bridge, you feel the gentle vibration of the water moving beneath the wooden planks, a reminder of the engineering required to live in harmony with the tides. A key activity for any traveler here is the ritual of the lobster roll at a local shack like Barnacle Billy's, but the deeper cultural experience lies in the Ogunquit Museum of American Art. Perched on the very edge of the rocky cliffs, the museum's glass walls blur the line between the curated canvases and the natural masterpiece of the coastline. The gardens here are filled with Rosa rugosa, the hardy beach rose, whose scent is a delicate floral counterpoint to the aggressive salt spray. The sound of the wind through the tall seagrass provides a meditative soundtrack to the sculptures that dot the grounds, weathered by the same storms that shape the stones below. As you prepare to depart Ogunquit, the trail leads you back toward the town center, passing the Ogunquit Playhouse, a summer stock theater that has been a cultural anchor since 1933. The transition from the wild, geologic silence of the Marginal Way back to the bustling, shingle-sided shops of the village is a reminder of the thin line Maine walks between wilderness and civilization. Leaving the southern sands behind, we head north. The terrain is about to change. The beaches will give way to deeper water and harder stone as we approach the legendary granite sentinels of the Midcoast. Our next stop takes us to the most iconic silhouette on the Atlantic, the sentinel that has guarded the entrance to Portland for centuries. As we move north from the sandy reaches of the southern border, the coastline of Maine undergoes a radical structural transformation. We are entering the realm of the Casco Bay, a flooded mountain range where the sea has reclaimed the valleys, leaving only the highest ridges exposed as a jagged archipelago known as the Calendar Islands. The air here is noticeably cooler, a sharp, bracing draft that smells of wet iron and deep-sea salt. The sound of the environment shifts from the rhythmic wash of sandy beaches to the violent, percussive slap of the Atlantic against vertical walls of metamorphic rock. The foundation of Cape Elizabeth is a masterclass in tectonic pressure. Here, the landscape is dominated by the Cape Elizabeth Formation, a series of dramatic, tilted strata that look like the pages of a stone book thrust upward at a 45-degree angle. These rocks began their journey 450 million years ago as layers of mud and sand on the floor of the Iapetus Ocean. During the Acadian orogeny, a massive continental collision, these sediments were buried miles deep, cooked by the Earth's internal heat, and compressed into schist and quartzite. When you stand at Portland Headlight, you are standing on the literal edge of a prehistoric mountain range. The ground beneath your feet is silver gray, shimmering with flakes of muscovite mica that catch the sun like fallen stars. The texture is coarse and abrasive, etched with deep grooves called glacial striations. These scars were carved roughly 15,000 years ago by the Laurentide ice sheet, a 2-mile-thick wall of ice that ground its way toward the sea, polishing the granite and dragging boulders the size of houses, known as glacial erratics, from hundreds of miles inland to their current resting places on the shore. Two specific destinations anchor this landscape. First, Ship Cove, a small horseshoe-shaped inlet where the water is a bruised, deep teal. Here, the temperature of the stone stays frigid, even in August, and the sound of the tide retreating through the cobbles, large sea-rounded stones, creates a hollow, clicking music unique to this cove. Second is the Portland Headlight Cliff Walk, where the path winds through narrow fissures in the rock. In these crevices, the air is still and carries the damp, earthy smell of moss and trapped rainwater, providing a stark contrast to the howling wind just a few feet away on the exposed ledges. This is a landscape defined by the fetch of the ocean, the thousands of miles of open water that allow waves to build up immense kinetic energy before finally shattering against the Casco Bay formations. It is a place of constant erosion, where the land isn't just meeting the water, but is being slowly, inevitably reclaimed by it. As the geology of Cape Elizabeth provides the skeletal frame, the ecology provides its breath. The transition from the salt-blasted rock to the inland thickets is abrupt, governed by the salt spray zone. The air here is a thick cocktail of cooling sea mist and the heavy, resinous scent of coniferous sap. You can hear the constant, dry clatter of the wind moving through the needles of the eastern white pine, Maine's state tree, which grows right up to the edge of the granite ledges, its branches permanently flagged and twisted by the prevailing northwesterlies. In the sheltered tidal pools of Ship Cove, life is governed by the lunar clock. As the water recedes, it leaves behind miniature glass-clear worlds where the temperature can rise 10 degrees above the surrounding ocean. Here, you will find the common periwinkle clinging to the rockweed, a yellowish-brown algae with air-filled bladders that pop underfoot with a satisfying, wet crunch. Moving through the submerged crevices are Asian shore crabs, Hemigrapsus sanguineus, an invasive but now permanent fixture of this shoreline, their mottled shells blending perfectly with the schist shadows. If you look toward the horizon, the fauna is dominated by the double-crested cormorant. These prehistoric-looking birds are often seen perched on the bell buoy offshore, wings spread wide to dry in the breeze, a necessary ritual as they lack the waterproof oils of other waterfowl. Their low, guttural croaks are frequently drowned out by the haunting, flute-like call of the common loon, which migrates to these salty bays once the inland lakes freeze over. Two specific destinations highlight the delicate balance of this ecosystem. The first is Great Pond, a freshwater sanctuary tucked just behind the coastal dunes. Here, the smell shifts from salt to the sweet, earthy aroma of decaying leaf litter and sweet gale. It is a primary nesting site for the great blue heron, whose massive, slow-beating wings create a low, whoomp-whoomp sound as they glide over the lily pads. The second is the Robinson Woods Preserve, where ancient hemlocks create a deep, permanent shade. The temperature under this canopy is noticeably frigid, preserving a microclimate where the painted trillium blooms in late spring, a flash of white and deep pink against the damp, dark floor of the forest. This is an ecology of resilience, where every leaf and feather has adapted to the chemical assault of the salt and the mechanical force of the gale. To understand the human history of Cape Elizabeth, one must first look at the rip-rap, the jagged, broken stone that separates the sea from the soil. This is a place where time is measured not in years, but in the slow erosion of the Iapetus Ocean's legacy. Long before the first European vessel sighted the white head of the cliffs, this was the seasonal home of the Wabanaki, specifically the Casco or Alcosisco people. They called this region the resting place, a strategic location where the abundance of the sea met the safety of the high ground. For the Wabanaki, the shoreline was a communal pantry. The sound of the era was the rhythmic scraping of stone tools against shells and the crackle of fires fueled by driftwood. They navigated these treacherous waters in birch-bark canoes, vessels of incredible engineering that could handle the heavy chop of the bay. The temperature of their history is found in the middens, ancient heaps of discarded shells, and bone found in sheltered spots like Kettle Cove. These mounds, some thousands of years old, are biological time capsules smelling of damp lime and ancient earth, proving a continuous, sophisticated presence that predates the discovery of Maine by millennia. The colonial shift began in the early 1600s. In 1605, the French explorer Samuel de Champlain charted the bay, but it was the English who saw the strategic value of the high cliffs. In 1791, under the authorization of George Washington, the Portland Head Light was completed. Built from local rubble stone and lit initially by whale oil, its construction marked the transition of the coast from a wild frontier to a managed maritime corridor. The sound of this era was the heavy metallic clank of the lighthouse bell and the shouting of men over the roar of a northeaster. Two destinations anchor this historical narrative. First is Fort Williams Park, where the ruins of the Goddard Mansion, a mid-19th century brownstone estate, stand as a skeletal reminder of the Victorian Gilded Age that saw Maine become a playground for the wealthy. The air inside the stone ruins is noticeably still and cold, smelling of old masonry and climbing ivy. Second is the Portland Headlight Museum, housed in the former keeper's quarters. Here, The floorboards creak with the weight of centuries, and the exhibits detail the Great Fire of 1866 in nearby Portland, an event that changed the architectural face of the entire bay, shifting from wood to the fireproof red brick that defines the region today. This history is a story of endurance. From the Wabanaki who read the tides like a book to the lighthouse keepers who trimmed wicks in hurricane-force winds, the deep time of Cape Elizabeth is written in the scars of the stone and the persistence of the light. The architecture of Cape Elizabeth is a dialogue between the uncompromising horizontal lines of the sea and the vertical ambition of human habitation. As you walk the transition from the rugged cliffs toward the residential high ground, the scent of the air shifts. The sharp brine of the Atlantic is softened by the sweet, woody aroma of cedar shingles and the faint, earthy smell of manicured seaside gardens. The soundscape here is refined. The distant, rhythmic clank thrum of a buoy is muffled by the thick, salt-toughened hedges of privet and bayberry that line the estates. The prevailing aesthetic is the shingle style, a late 19th century American architectural movement that sought to blend buildings into the natural landscape. Unlike the rigid, painted brick of Portland, the homes here are clad in eastern white cedar. Over time, the salt air performs a slow, chemical alchemy on the wood, turning it from a raw tan to a celebrated Nantucket gray. This is a culture of intentional weathering, a recognition that in Maine, anything that fights the elements will eventually lose. The culture is one of quiet wealth and maritime stoicism, where the most prestigious homes are often those that appear most humbled by the wind. Two specific destinations illustrate this cultural identity. First is the Dyer Hutchinson farmhouse, a classic example of early Maine connected architecture. This style, often described as big house, little house, back house, barn, allowed farmers and mariners to move between their living quarters and their livestock without ever stepping out into the brutal zero temperatures of a down-east winter. The smell inside these older structures is a comforting blend of beeswax, old pine, and the lingering coolness of stone foundations. Second is the Cape Elizabeth Town Center, where the Thomas Memorial Library serves as a modern cultural anchor. It is a space defined by light and silence, where the community gathers to preserve the oral and written histories of the Capaneers, the multi-generational families who have navigated these waters since the Revolutionary War. The ritual of life here is governed by the check-in. Whether it is a lobsterman checking his gauges at Kettle Cove or a resident checking the horizon for an approaching sea turn, a sudden, cooling fog bank, the culture is rooted in observation. This is not a place of hurried movement. It is a place of standing still and watching the light change on the schist ledges, a practice of patience that has defined the Casco Bay identity for centuries. The legacy of Cape Elizabeth is not one of static preservation, but of active, rhythmic endurance. To stand at the edge of the Atlantic here is to realize that the wonders of Maine are not merely sights to be seen, but systems to be respected. The modern challenge of this landscape is the rising baseline of the sea itself. As the Gulf of Maine warms faster than almost any other part of the world's oceans, the relationship between the Casco Bay Formation and the water is entering a new, more volatile chapter. The sound of the era is no longer just the predictable tide, but the increasing frequency of king tides that crest over the granite barriers, smelling of deep ocean silt and the urgent metallic scent of flooded salt marshes. Conservation here is a community-driven mandate. The Cape Elizabeth Land Trust has successfully protected over 800 acres of this fractured coastline, ensuring that the wildness of the Wabanaki's ancient home isn't entirely swallowed by the sprawl of the 21st century. The legacy is found in places like Great Pond, where the transition from saltwater to freshwater remains a protected sanctuary for the spotted turtle. To walk these trails is to feel the temperature of a landscape that is being held in trust, a cooling, mossy reprieve from the sun-baked asphalt of the modern world. As the sun begins its long, slow descent toward the western pines, the light on the Portland headlight changes from a stark white to a deep, honeyed gold. This is the blue hour of the Midcoast, where the sky and the sea become indistinguishable, separated only by the rhythmic white pulse of the lighthouse beam. It is a moment of profound, grounded silence, broken only by the distant, mournful lowing of a foghorn, a sound that has signaled home to sailors for over 200 years. But the trail does not end at the lighthouse. To truly understand the shattered mirror of this coast, we must move deeper into the labyrinth of the Midcoast. We leave the high, singular cliffs of the Cape and head toward the intricate, narrow peninsulas of the Kennebunks. Here, the geology will soften, the history will turn toward the great age of sail, and the scent of the sea will mingle with the fragrance of tidal rivers. We are moving from the sentinel of the bay toward the heart of the maritime village. Our next stop is a place of winding river bends, historic boatyards, and the persistent, briny charm of a working harbor. As we depart the high, singular cliffs of Cape Elizabeth, the landscape begins to fracture into a more intimate, labyrinthine geography. Arriving in Kennebunkport, the air undergoes a subtle but distinct shift. The raw, aggressive salt spray of the open ocean is tempered here by the brackish influence of the Kennebunk River. The scent is complex, a base note of damp river mud and marsh grass, topped with the sweet, honeyed fragrance of common lilac, wafting from the gardens of historic captains' homes. The geology of this region is defined by the Webb-Hannett Pluton, a massive body of igneous rock that crystallized deep beneath the Earth's crust during the Ordovician period, roughly 450 million years ago. Unlike the tilted, dramatic pages of stone we saw to the south, the rock here is a sturdy, light gray granodiorite. It is a salt and pepper stone, coarse to the touch and remarkably resistant to the freeze-thaw cycles of the Maine winter. Your first impression of Kennebunkport is likely shaped by the water's edge at Dock Square. Here, the sound of the environment is a rhythmic, metallic clink-clink of halyards hitting aluminum masts in the rising tide. The temperature of the water in the river remains a constant, bracing chill, even when the afternoon sun warms the red brick sidewalks of the village. The river acts as a thermal regulator, pulling a cool, saline draft inland that keeps the humidity of the southern plains at bay. To understand the true geological character of the town, one must look toward the blowhole at Ocean Avenue. This is a specific destination where the granodiorite has been undercut by thousands of years of hydraulic pressure. During a high spring tide, the sound here is a sudden, percussive thump, followed by a ghostly hiss as the ocean is forced through a narrow fissure, spraying a fine, cold mist into the air that smells tensely of crushed shells. A few miles to the east lies Cape Porpoise, a destination that feels like a world apart from the bustling center of the port. This is a drowned harbor, protected by a protective semicircle of islands, including Goat Island. The geology here is more submerged. At low tide, the receding water reveals vast mudflats and zostera seagrass beds that ripple like emerald silk. The sound is a quiet, sucking pop of air escaping the silt, a meditative contrast to the crashing surf of the open capes. It is a landscape that invites you to slow down, to match your pulse to the 6-hour breath of the moon. The human narrative of Kennebunkport begins long before the gilded mansions of the summer people lined the coast. For the Wabanaki, specifically the Abenaki and Pennacook peoples, the Kennebunk River was known as the Long Cut Bank. It served as a vital seasonal corridor for harvesting shellfish and navigating the interior forests. The sound of this era was the rhythmic dip and swirl of cedar paddles in the brackish flow, and the smell was the sweet, heavy scent of wood smoke from summer encampments near the dunes. The temperature of this history is found in the soil, fertile and silty, a gift from the river's ancient glacial path. By the 1700s and 1800s, the soundscape of the river changed to the sharp, percussive thwack of adzes and the rhythmic shush of long saws. Kennebunkport became a premier shipbuilding center. The culture was one of sawdust and oakum, where the air smelled of hot pine tar and wet hemp. Walking through the historic district, you see the architectural legacy of this wealth. Federal and Greek revival mansions built by sea captains who had seen the ports of China and Europe. The Lord Mansion, built in 1812, stands as a testament to this era, its symmetrical windows staring out toward the water that provided its owner's fortune. A key activity for any traveler seeking the marrow of this place is a visit to the Seashore Trolley Museum, the world's oldest and largest mass transit museum. Located just inland among the scrub pines, the sound here is the nostalgic, electric hum of restored streetcars from Boston, New Orleans, and Budapest gliding over iron rails. The smell is a nostalgic blend of old leather, machine oil, and the cooling dampness of the surrounding woods. Another essential destination is St. Anne's by the Sea Episcopal Church, a stunning stone chapel built in 1887 from local sea-worn granite. Inside, the air is hushed and significantly colder than the exterior sea breeze, smelling of old hymnals and the salt that has seeped into the very masonry over a century of storms. The modern culture of the port is a delicate dance between its identity as a working lobster harbor and its reputation as a presidential retreat. At Cape Porpoise, you see the unvarnished side of this balance. Here, the key activity is simply watching the tide. At the pier, the sound of the wind whistling through the rigging of the lobster boats is a constant, lonely music. You can smell the bait, a pungent, briny aroma of herring that is the lifeblood of the local economy. As we prepare to depart, we cross the Matthew J. Lanigan Bridge, leaving the boutique shops behind. The transition is palpable. The density of the village thins as we head toward the more rugged, wind-swept stretches of the Midcoast. We are leaving the refined harbors of the South for a place where the granite becomes higher and the history becomes more industrial. Our next stop takes us to the jagged finger peninsulas of Boothbay and the geological wonder of Pemaquid, where the rocks themselves tell a story of a world turned sideways. Leaving the gentle river bends of the South, we enter the Midcoast, a region where the very bones of the earth seem to have been wrenched and twisted by a cosmic hand. The air here loses its remaining sweetness, replaced by a cold, sharp, and uncompromising oceanic bite. It smells of deep trench salt, wet iron, and the pungent, sulfurous aroma of exposed mudflats at low tide. The sound is no longer the slap of waves, but a heavy, resonant boom as the Atlantic finds its way into the deep, narrow rock fissures of the Pemaquid Peninsula. The geology of Pemaquid Point is perhaps the most visually arresting in all of New England. Here, you are walking upon the Bucksport Formation, a series of metamorphic rocks, primarily schist and gneiss, that date back to the Silurian period, roughly 430 million years ago. What makes this location unique is the dramatic tilting. Through the immense pressure of the Acadian orogeny, these horizontal layers of seafloor sediment were compressed, heated, and turned vertically, creating a landscape that looks like a petrified forest of stone ribs. As you walk across the ledges near the Pemaquid Point Lighthouse, the texture under your boots is incredibly varied. You move from the rough, sandpaper-like surface of quartzite to the shimmering, flaky layers of biotite mica. Most striking are the pegmatite dikes, thick, white veins of molten rock that injected themselves into the dark schist millions of years ago. These white ribbons create a stark, monochromatic contrast against the gray sea, looking like lightning bolts frozen in the ground. Two specific destinations anchor this rugged landscape. First is the Oven's Mouth Preserve in nearby Boothbay. This is a narrow, tidal pinch point where the entire volume of a massive saltwater basin must squeeze through a gap only a few yards wide. The sound here is a rushing, river-like roar that changes pitch with the tide, and the temperature remains significantly lower than the surrounding forest due to the Venturi effect of the rushing water. Second is the Pemaquid Beach, a rare geological anomaly in the Midcoast. While most of this region is jagged rock, this pocket of fine white sand consists of pulverized glacial flour and crushed shells. The sound here is the soft, rhythmic hush of the sea, providing a sensory reprieve from the violent energy of the nearby cliffs. This is a landscape of deep time made visible. It is a place where you can touch the literal folds of the planet's crust, feeling the immense, silent power of the tectonic forces that built the Appalachian chain and eventually tore the continents apart. In the Midcoast, the ecology is a study of specialization. The air, heavy with the scent of decomposing kelp and the sharp medicinal aroma of balsam fir, acts as a delivery system for life. Here, the fog forest phenomenon is in full effect. The frequent maritime blankets of mist provide enough moisture for life to thrive in places where the soil is almost non-existent. The sound of the forest is a soft, muffled dripping, the fog drip, as condensation collects on needles and falls to the mossy floor, a silver-cold rain that sustains the landscape during the dry height of summer. Among the fractured rocks of Pemaquid, the flora is dominated by the common juniper. These shrubs do not grow tall. Instead, they hug the schist, their wood twisted into gnarled, skeletal shapes by the wind. They smell of gin and dry earth, providing a low-profile shelter for the savanna sparrow, whose thin, buzzing trill is often the only bird call that can pierce the roar of the surf. In the cracks of the vertical strata, you will find the harebell, a delicate blue wildflower that appears impossibly fragile against the monochromatic gray of the stone, its stems vibrating in the constant coastal draft. The fauna of the Midcoast is defined by the intersection of the deep water and the rocky shore. This is the realm of the harbor seal. On the half-tide rocks just offshore from Boothbay, you can hear their distinctive mournful barking and the wet slap of their flippers against the stone. When the tide is high, they are silent hunters, their dark heads bobbing in the swells like smooth river stones. Above them, the osprey patrols the inlets. The sound of an osprey strike, a sudden, violent thwack as it hits the water at high speed, is a startling reminder of the raw, predatory energy of the bay. Two specific destinations offer a closer look at this biological diversity. First is the coastal Maine Botanical Gardens in Boothbay. Second is the Pemaquid Pond, a massive freshwater body just inland from the salt. Here, the ecology shifts entirely. The smell is of lily pads and warm pine, and the sound is the deep, percussive chugging of the American bullfrog. This is an ecosystem of edges. Whether it is the thin line of lichen on a granite face or the transition from salt marsh to fair thicket, life in the Midcoast exists in the narrow margins, holding on with a tenacity that mirrors the stone itself. To understand the history of the Midcoast, one must look beneath the surface of the soil to the shell middens that line the estuaries of the Damariscotta River. Long before European eyes fell upon these fractured peninsulas, this was the heart of the Wabanaki summer world. For the Etchemin and later the Penobscot and Passamaquoddy people, the Midcoast was a land of staggering abundance. The sound of this era was the rhythmic thud of stone mallets and the crackling of massive communal fires where millions of oysters were shucked and dried for the winter. The temperature of this history is held in the calcium-rich earth of the whaleback shell midden. These mounds, some reaching 30 feet high before they were mined for chicken feed in the 1800s, are biological archives. Walking near them, the air feels limey and dry, smelling of ancient seawater and sun-bleached bone. This was a sophisticated, managed landscape, a dawn land where the tides were a calendar and the migrations of the alewives were the clock. The Wabanaki knew the Pemaquid Peninsula as a place of transition, a sacred bridge between the spirits of the deep forest and the spirits of the Great Salt. The colonial chapter began with a violence and speed that the stone itself seemed to resist. In 1607, the Popham colony was established just to the west, but it was Pemaquid that became the true frontier of the English Empire. By the 1620s, the sound of the coast was the rhythmic clink of blacksmiths and the low, heavy rumbling of ox carts hauling timber. Colonial Pemaquid was a bustling metropolis of the New World, a fortified outpost that felt the constant tension of the French and Indian Wars. The air here in the 1670s would have smelled of wood smoke, wet wool, and the metallic tang of black powder. Two specific destinations anchor this deep-time narrative. First is Fort William Henry, a massive stone reconstruction of the 1692 fortress. As you step inside the granite walls, the sound of the wind is suddenly cut off, replaced by a heavy, vault-like silence. The temperature drops noticeably within the shadows of the masonry, where the smell of damp mortar and cold iron lingers. Second is the Pemaquid archaeological site, where the sunken city remains. Here, you can look down into the stone foundations of 17th century taverns and homes that were burned and buried during the conflicts of 1689. The sound is the soft rustle of the wind through the tall grass that now grows where a city once stood, a reminder that in the Midcoast, the forest always waits for its turn to reclaim the shore. This history is a story of layers, of oyster shells, then of English brick, and finally of the granite monuments we see today. It is a reminder that while the wonders of Maine feel eternal, the human presence here has always been a negotiation with a landscape that does not easily yield. The architecture of the Midcoast is a physical manifestation of a sea-facing psychology. In Boothbay Harbor, the buildings do not merely sit on the land, they cling to it, often supported by spindly wooden piers that allow the high tides to roll beneath the floorboards. The air here smells of fresh white cedar and the faint, sweet scent of petunias from window boxes, a delicate domestic contrast to the rugged, salt-bleached shingles of the fish shacks. The soundscape is dominated by the harbor pulse, the low-frequency thrum of marine engines, and the rhythmic wooden clack of gangways shifting with the water level. A primary cultural characteristic of this region is the working waterfront aesthetic. In Boothbay, luxury yachts and weathered lobster boats share the same narrow channels, creating a visual dialogue between the town's shipbuilding past and its tourism-driven present. The architecture is defined by the salt box and the cape, styles designed with low profiles and steep roofs to shed the heavy, wet snow of a Maine nor'easter. The culture is one of Yankee ingenuity, a quiet, often humorous stoicism where locals measure the severity of a winter by how many cords of wood remain in the shed by March. Two specific destinations highlight this cultural tapestry. First is the Burnt Island Light, accessible only by boat. This living history museum allows you to step into the 1950s era home of a lighthouse keeper. The air inside is still and carries the scent of floor wax and sea salt dampened upholstery. The architecture is utilitarian yet elegant, designed to withstand hurricane-force winds. Second is the Spruce Point Inn, a historic Grande Dame resort that represents the 19th century rusticators movement. Here, the architecture shifts to the shingle style, with wide wraparound porches designed for taking the air. The sound here is the soft, rhythmic thump-thump of rocking chairs on wooden planks, a tempo that mirrors the slow, meditative pace of the Era Trail's philosophy. The ritual of the Midcoast is found in the boat launch. Whether it is a multi-million-dollar schooner or a hand-carved dory, the act of committing wood to water is a sacred event here. It is a culture that respects the line, the boundary between the safety of the harbor and the unpredictability of the Gulf of Maine. This cultural gravity is what keeps these towns grounded, preventing them from becoming mere museum pieces and ensuring they remain living, breathing maritime communities. The legacy of the Midcoast is etched into the very hardness of its bedrock. To look upon the vertical strata of Pemaquid Point is to realize that this landscape does not merely exist, it endures. The transition we see today is a movement from an era of extraction, of lime, timber, and fish, to an era of stewardship. The modern identity of Boothbay and Pemaquid is defined by a deep-seated conservancy culture. As the climate shifts, the focus has turned to the preservation of the blue carbon stored in the vast seagrass meadows of the Muscongas Bay, a silent, underwater forest that is as vital to the planet as the balsam firs on the cliffs. The sound of the current era is one of scientific inquiry. In East Boothbay, the Bigelow Laboratory for Ocean Sciences represents the high-tech transition of the maritime legacy. Here, the air doesn't smell of tar, but of sterile labs and the faint ozone scent of electronic sensors used to monitor the health of the Gulf of Maine. This is the new working waterfront, where data is harvested alongside lobster. The legacy being built now is one of resilience, ensuring that the jagged beauty of the Bucksport Formation remains a sanctuary for both the harbor seal and the human spirit for another 400 million years. As we prepare to leave the Midcoast, the landscape begins to gather height. We are moving away from the narrow, intimate inlets of Boothbay and toward a place where the scale of the earth feels suddenly, overwhelmingly larger. The hills are becoming mountains, and the water is opening up into a vast, island-studded expanse that has long been the spiritual heart of the Penobscot Nation. The cooling afternoon draft is picking up, and the scent of the open sea is becoming even more concentrated. We are heading north, toward the granite amphitheater where the mountains finally meet the tide. Our next stop is the high ground of Camden, where we will look down upon the Penobscot Bay from the summit of the gods. As we travel further up the coast, the horizon begins to tilt upward. We are entering a rare geographic anomaly where the fractured Atlantic coastline suddenly collides with a range of ancient, rounded peaks. This is Camden, a place famously described as the location where the mountains meet the sea. The arrival is marked by a dramatic change in air pressure and temperature. As you move from the harbor toward the base of the hills, the air loses its heavy, salty humidity and becomes crisp, thin, and scented with the sharp medicinal fragrance of sweet fern and crushed stone. The geology of the Penobscot Hills, specifically Mount Batty and Mount Magunticook, is a testament to the staggering power of the Acadian orogeny. These mountains are composed of Camden Formation rock, primarily a rugged, gray, metamorphic quartzite and schist. Unlike the sedimentary layers we saw in the south, these rocks were forged under such immense heat and pressure 400 million years ago that they became nearly indestructible. This hardness is why they remain standing as high sentinels, while the surrounding landscape was ground down by time and ice. The first impression of Camden is one of verticality and scale. Standing at the public landing, the sound of the environment is defined by the clatter of the wind moving through the rigging of the massive windjammers moored in the harbor. But as you turn your back to the water and look toward the summit of Mount Batty, the sound shifts to a low-frequency hum, the wind cresting over the stone ridges. The temperature at the summit is often 5 to 10 degrees cooler than the harbor, providing a literal high-ground perspective of the Penobscot Bay. Two specific destinations anchor this stop. First is the Mount Batty summit, accessible by a winding road or a steep, lung-bursting trail. From the stone lookout tower built in 1921, the view is a geological map come to life. You can see the shattered coastline stretching toward Acadia, and the sound here is a solitary, whistling gale that smells of high-altitude lichen and dry moss. Second is Magunticook Lake, tucked just behind the primary ridge. Here, the geology takes a different form. The massive Maiden Cliff drops nearly 800 feet vertically into the freshwater. The sound is a haunting echo, a slap of water against the base of the cliff that resonates through the valley, smelling of deep lake silt and sun-warmed hemlock. This is a landscape that demands a shift in perspective. In Camden, the slow travel philosophy is forced upon you by the terrain. The hills are too steep to hurry, and the view from the top is too vast to ignore. It is a place where the deep time of the mountains and the restless energy of the sea exist in a perfect, precarious balance. The history of Camden is a story of strategic elevation. Long before the white sails of the windjammers dominated the harbor, this land was the domain of the Penobscot Nation, part of the Wabanaki Confederacy. They knew these hills as Maguntikuk, meaning great swell of the sea. To the Penobscot, the mountains were not just landmarks, but spiritual sentinels that provided a vantage point over the vast resources of the bay. The sound of this era was the rhythmic scrape of birch bark against the shore and the whistling of the wind through high-altitude pines, a sound they believed was the breath of the spirits. The temperature of their history is found in the deep, shaded glens of the hills, where snow lingers well into May, preserving a prehistoric coolness. In the 1700s and 1800s, the focus shifted from the summits to the falls. The Maguntikuk River drops abruptly into the harbor, a geological quirk that provided immense water power for early settlers. The sound of Camden became the industrial thump-hiss of woolen mills and the rhythmic clinking of anchors being forged. The air during the mid-19th century would have smelled of wood smoke, raw wool, and the metallic tang of the foundries. The architecture of this era remains in the Main Street Historic District, where red brick blocks and the Camden Opera House, built in 1894, reflect a town that grew wealthy on the intersection of mountain power and sea trade. A key activity for the modern traveler is a journey aboard a national historic landmark vessel, such as the schooner Surprise or the Angelique. As you step onto the wooden deck, the smell is a heady mix of pine tar, weathered canvas, and the briny exhale of the rising tide. The culture here is deeply rooted in the windjammer legacy. It is a community that values the slow, manual labor of sailing, the grunt of the winch, and the snap of a sail catching a nor'easter. Another essential destination is the Camden Public Library and its adjacent amphitheater. Designed by landscape architect Fletcher Steele in the 1920s, this outdoor space uses local stone to create a Grecian theater that overlooks the masts. The sound here is hushed, a meditative pocket where the air smells of mown grass and old books. As we prepare to depart Camden, we head north along Route 1, where the road hugs the edge of the Penobscot Bay. The transition is marked by a widening of the horizon. The intimate, enclosed feel of the Midcoast peninsulas is fading, replaced by the vast, oceanic scale of the East. We are leaving the protective shadows of the Magunticook Range for a place where the granite becomes pink, the tides become legendary, and the wilderness feels increasingly ancient. Our next stop is the crown jewel of the North Atlantic coast, a place shaped by fire, ice, and the relentless ambition of the sea. We are heading for the fractured beauty of Mount Desert Island. As we cross the narrow bridge onto Mount Desert Island, the geography of Maine reaches its most dramatic crescendo. Here, the Earth doesn't just meet the sea, it defies it. The air is a sharp, atmospheric contradiction, chilled by the Labrador Current, yet carrying the sun-baked, resinous scent of pitch pine. The sound is a constant, low-frequency thrum, the acoustic signature of the fjord of Somme Sound, where the wind is funneled between granite walls, creating a haunting, whistling drone that stays with you long after you leave the shoreline. The geological story of this island is one of fire followed by a slow, crushing ice. We are standing on the Cadillac Mountain granite, a massive pluton that formed 420 million years ago during the Devonian period. This isn't just any stone. It is a distinct, pink-hued granite, rich in orthoclase feldspar, which gives the cliffs a warm, almost glowing quality at sunrise. This rock was born from a collapsing volcano, a caldera, that was once as violent as any on the modern Pacific Rim. Over eons, the softer overlying rock was stripped away, leaving behind the hardened core we see today. But the fire was only the beginning. Roughly 20,000 years ago, the Laurentide ice sheet, a mile-thick wall of frozen water, ground its way across this landscape. The ice didn't just move over the mountains, it reshaped them into roches moutonnées, or sheepbacks, hills that are smooth and gently sloping on the north side where the ice climbed up, and jagged and steep on the south side where the ice plucked massive chunks of granite away as it descended. This is why Mount Desert Island feels like a series of stone waves frozen in mid-break, all cresting toward the Atlantic. Two specific destinations illustrate this glacial violence. First is Ship Harbor, a drowned valley where the granite has been carved into a tight S curve. At low tide, the sound is a rhythmic, hollow gurgle as water traps air in the underwater caves. The temperature here drops significantly in the shadows of the overhanging ledges, smelling of wet iron and cold kelp. Second is the seawall, a natural barrier of loose, gray granite cobbles heaped up by centuries of storm waves. Walking across these stones creates a loud, musical clack-clack sound, a percussive reminder of the ocean's mechanical power. Here, the air is thick with a heavy, saline mist that tastes of salt and ancient stone. This is a landscape of deep time made tactile. To touch the pink granite of the south side is to touch the cooled heart of a prehistoric volcano, polished by the weight of a vanished world of ice. On the south side of Mount Desert Island, the ecology is a battle of inches. The air here is dominated by the fog filter, a thick, moving wall of maritime moisture that rolls in from the Gulf of Maine, smelling of cold salt and the sweet, decaying organic matter of the peat bogs. This fog is the lifeblood of the island, providing a constant silver-gray irrigation that allows Arctic plants to thrive far south of their usual range. The sound is a muffled, heavy silence, broken only by the rhythmic, mournful oink of the Leach's storm petrel returning to its underground burrows on the offshore islands. The Krummholz effect is the defining botanical signature of the high granite ridges. Here, the balsam fir and black spruce do not grow as trees, but as low, twisted mats of wood, stunted by the constant abrasive force of salt-laden winds. They smell intensely of resin and dry needles, their branches flagged to point permanently inland. In the cracks of the Cadillac granite, you will find the three-toothed cinquefoil, a hardy wildflower whose leaves turn a deep blood red in the autumn, mirroring the pink hues of the stone beneath. The fauna of the south side is governed by the verticality of the cliffs. This is the premier nesting ground for the peregrine falcon. Between May and August, the air above the precipice and otter cliffs is filled with their high-pitched, piercing cock-cock-cock calls as they dive at speeds exceeding 200 miles per hour. On the forest floor, the damp, moss-covered talus slopes provide a home for the red-backed salamander. The temperature in these rock crevices remains a constant subterranean chill, smelling of wet earth and ancient lichen. Two specific destinations highlight this biological resilience. First is Wonderland, a flat, easy trail that meanders through a forest of jack pine, a rare tree in Maine that requires the heat of fire to open its cones. The sound here is a dry, metallic click of needles in the wind, and the air is noticeably warmer and more fragrant than the spray-blasted cliffs. Second is the Big Heath, a massive raised peat bog on the island's quiet side. Here, the ecology shifts to a miniature world of pitcher plants and sundews, carnivorous plants that have evolved to eat insects because the acidic soil offers no nutrients. The sound is a soft, sucking squelch underfoot, and the air smells of sweet gale and stagnant, tea-colored water. This is an ecology of extreme adaptation. From the falcon in the sky to the sundew in the bog, every living thing on the south side of Acadia has found a way to turn the island's harsh geological constraints into a sanctuary. The history of Mount Desert Island, MDI, is a narrative of convergence, where the people of the Dawnland met the explorers of the Old World against a backdrop of granite that had already waited 400 million years for their arrival. Long before the first European sail breached the horizon, the Wabanaki, specifically the Penobscot and Passamaquoddy, called this island Pemaquid, meaning the sloping land. For them, the south side was a seasonal storehouse. The sound of this era was the rhythmic thump-scrape of making birch bark containers and the crackle of fires at Bass Harbor, where the smell of roasting finfish mingled with the salty chill of the Labrador Current. The temperature of this history is preserved in the middens of Fernald Point. These ancient heaps of soft shell clam act as a geological blanket, neutralizing the naturally acidic soil and preserving the bones of the great auk and the sea mink, creatures now lost to time. Walking near these sites, the air feels dry and limey, a stark contrast to the damp, resinous forest floor. The Wabanaki perspective was one of integration. They didn't just live on the island, they were a biological part of its seasonal rhythm, moving with the alewives and the berries. The European discovery arrived in 1604 with Samuel de Champlain, who gave the island its modern name, l'Île des Monts Déserts, after seeing the fire-scarred, treeless granite summits from his ship. The sound of the 17th century was the heavy thud of French and English boots on the stone, and the smell was one of wood smoke and wet wool as Jesuit missionaries attempted to establish Saint-Sauveur near Somme Sound. The mission was short-lived, destroyed by an English raid in 1613, leaving behind only charred timber and the silent, enduring granite. Two specific destinations anchor this historical journey. First is Carroll Homestead, a 19th century mountain farm carved out of the rocky, quiet side. Here the architecture is humble, unpainted cedar and low ceilings designed to trap heat. The air inside smells of dried herbs and old wood, and the sound is the eerie, lonely whistling of the wind through the stone walls that farmers built to clear their fields. Second is the Bass Harbor Headlight, built in 1858. Perched on the very edge of a sea cliff, the lighthouse represents the era when the island became a vital waypoint for the coastal granite and lumber trade. The sound here is the rhythmic, mechanical clank of the bell buoy offshore, a metallic heartbeat that has guided sailors through the fog for over a century. This history is a story of layered endurance. From the Wabanaki who read the stars over Cadillac Mountain to the rusticators of the 1800s who sought a return to the primitive, the deep time of Acadia, is a reminder that we are all merely seasonal visitors to this ancient stone citadel. The architecture of Mount Desert Island is a study in the gilded contrast. On the south side, particularly around Seal Harbor and Northeast Harbor, the buildings do not attempt to dominate the granite. They seek to mimic its permanence. The air here is refined, smelling of salt-toughened cedar, expensive wood smoke, and the damp, earthy fragrance of moss gardens, a cultural hallmark where homeowners encourage the growth of polytrichum moss over traditional grass to match the aesthetic of the surrounding forest. The soundscape is hushed, defined by the crunch of pea-gravel driveways and the distant muffled chime of a ship's clock from a moored yacht. The primary architectural legacy is the shingle-style cottage. These are not small cabins, but sprawling multi-story estates designed by architects like John Calvin Stevens. Clad in unpainted eastern white cedar shingles that weather to a silvery, lichen-like gray, these homes feature wide stone verandas and eyebrow dormers that peer out at the Cranberry Isles. The culture of the South Side is one of quiet, ancestral wealth, a community that values rusticity over flash. It is a place where a 100-year-old wooden rowing dory is more respected than a modern speedboat. Two specific destinations illustrate this cultural identity. First is the Abbé Museum at Sieur de Mons. The architecture is a Mediterranean-inspired octagonal spring house, but its contents are the soul of the island, the cultural history of the Wabanaki. The air inside is cool and smells of sweetgrass and tanned hide, creating a silent, sacred space for reflection. Second is the Astuiku Azalea Garden. This is a masterpiece of Eastern meets Down East design, where Japanese garden principles are applied to native Maine flora. The sound is the delicate trickle of water over granite basins, and the temperatures noticeably cooler, held in place by thick walls of Atlantic white cedar. The defining cultural ritual of the island, however, is found on the carriage roads. Built by John D. Rockefeller, Jr. between 1913 and 1940, these 45 miles of broken stone roads were designed to banish the infernal combustion engine and preserve the pace of the horse and carriage. The architecture here consists of 17 hand-cut granite bridges, each unique. Standing under the cobblestone bridge, the sound is a rhythmic clip-clop if a carriage passes, or the low shush of bicycle tires on gravel. The air smells of crushed stone and damp fern, a sensory experience of a world that refused to speed up. As the sun sets over the Bass Harbor headlight, casting long amber shadows across the pink granite, we prepare for a transition that takes us from the salt-sprayed coast into the deep, forested heart of the state. We have traveled from the sandy southern borders through the fractured peninsulas of the Midcoast to the volcanic heights of Acadia. But the shattered mirror of the coast still has one final, bustling secret to reveal before we turn inland. We are heading across the island to Bar Harbor, the historic gateway where maritime commerce and high society legacy converge. As we round the northeastern shoulder of Mount Desert Island, the wild, spray-blasted solitude of the south side yields to the protected, bustling waters of Frenchman Bay. Arriving in Bar Harbor feels like stepping into a theater where the stage is the sea. The air here is a dense, aromatic blend. The sharp brine of the harbor, the scent of expensive spruce charcoal grills from the village, and a persistent, damp cool that rolls off the Porcupine Islands. The geology of Bar Harbor is defined by a striking transition from the pink granite heights we just left. Here, the landscape is underpinned by the Bar Harbor Formation, a series of early Silurian sedimentary and volcanic rocks. Unlike the massive, uniform blocks of the Cadillac granite, these are finely bedded siltstones and sandstones, appearing in dark, somber shades of gray and charcoal. Because these rocks are softer than the granite, the glaciers were able to carve a deep, wide harbor, leaving behind the bar, for which the town is named, a literal gravel tombolo that connects the town to Bar Island at low tide. Your first impression of Bar Harbor is defined by the tide's clock. At high tide, the town feels like a classic maritime village, with the sound of the environment dominated by the slap of the bay against the granite piers of West Street. But as the tide recedes, a hidden landscape emerges. The sound shifts to the crunch of thousands of tourists and locals walking across the exposed gravel bar. The temperature on the bar is often several degrees warmer than the shaded streets, as the dark stones soak up the midday sun, smelling of dried seaweed and sun-baked mud. A critical destination for understanding this geology is Shore Path, established in 1880. Walking this trail, you can see where the dark, tilted layers of the Bar Harbor Formation meet the water. The sound here is a rhythmic hiss as the incoming tide filters through the fractured shale. Another essential stop is the Otway Ledge, where the intrusion of the younger granite into the older sedimentary rock is visible, a literal contact zone where you can place your hand on two different geological eras simultaneously. In Bar Harbor, the landscape is a living map of change, where the slow, steady sedimentation of an ancient sea was eventually interrupted by the violent birth of a volcano, creating the sheltered, deep-water sanctuary we see today. The history of Bar Harbor is a study in The Great Transformation. To the Wabanaki, this area was known as Manes Idik, the clam-gathering place. The sound of this era was the rhythmic chink of stone tools and the crackle of fires on the gravel bar where shellfish were processed. The air would have smelled of wood smoke and the sweet, heavy scent of drying sweetgrass. This ancestral relationship was one of utility and respect, centered on the seasonal abundance of Frenchman Bay. By the late 1800s, the soundscape changed dramatically to the clop of carriage horses and the distant, low whistle of steamships. This was the Gilded Age when Bar Harbor, then called Eden, became the premier summer colony for the American elite, the Rockefellers, Pulitzers, and Vanderbilts. The architecture of this era was defined by the great cottages, sprawling wooden palaces that smelled of fresh paint and expensive tobacco. However, the culture of Bar Harbor was forever altered by the Great Fire of 1947. The sound of that year was the terrifying roar of a firestorm that consumed 17,000 acres and 67 cottages. The legacy of the fire is why the town today is a mix of surviving historic brick and mid-century reconstruction. A key activity for any visitor seeking the soul of the town is a visit to the Abbey Museum downtown. Here, the culture is grounded in the contemporary voice of the Wabanaki people. The air inside is hushed and smells of cedar, creating a bridge between the ancient gathering place and the modern tourist hub. Another essential destination is the George B. Dorr Museum of Natural History, located in a converted powerhouse. The sound here is the quiet hum of scientific inquiry, highlighting the transition of Bar Harbor from a resort to a world-class center for oceanographic and genetic research. The culture of Bar Harbor is one of dual identity. By day, the streets are a high-energy mix of international languages and the smell of blueberry ice cream. By night, as the cruise ships depart, the town regains a quiet, maritime dignity. You can hear the rhythmic ding of the harbor buoys and feel the sharp drop in temperature as the down-east fog rolls in from the Porcupine Islands. As we depart the island, we cross the Trenton Bridge, leaving the salt spray behind. We are turning our backs on the shattered mirror of the coast and heading into the vast, green interior. The transition is immediate. The air loses its saline bite and becomes heavy with the scent of damp earth and river silt. We are entering the corridor of the lumber kings and the ancient highways of the indigenous people. Our next stop takes us to the heart of the Penobscot River Valley and Bangor, where the pulse of Maine's interior begins to beat. As we move inland, the horizon flattens and the air undergoes a profound transformation. The sharp, iodine tang of the Atlantic evaporates, replaced by the green scent of a continent. Arriving in the Penobscot River Valley, the atmosphere is heavy with the fragrance of white pine and the damp, alluvial musk of river silt. The temperature here is less stable than on the coast. Away from the ocean's thermal regulation, the afternoons feel warmer and the air more still, carrying the low-frequency thrum of the river's current. The geology of this region is defined by the Penobscot Formation, a vast belt of Cambrian-Ordovician metamorphic rock, primarily peletic schist and quartzite. However, the most striking geological features here are not the bedrock, but the gifts of the glacier. As we travel north, the land is marked by eskers, long winding ridges of sand and gravel deposited by glacial rivers roughly 12,000 years ago. These whalebacks of earth create the natural highways that the Wabanaki and later the timber barons used to navigate the interior. Your first impression of Bangor, the Queen City, is one of elevated industrialism. The city sits at the head of tide on the Penobscot River, the highest point a seagoing vessel can reach. The sound of the environment is a duality, the rushing hiss of the river moving over the falls and the urban hum of a city that was once the lumber capital of the world. The temperature near the water's edge is consistently cooler as the river pulls a draft of mountain air down from the north toward the sea. A critical destination for understanding this landscape is the Penobscot River Trails. Here, the geology is tactile. You can feel the transition from the soft riverbanks to the hard, unyielding schist of the riverbed. The sound is the gurgle of the water passing over ancient fish weirs. Another essential stop is Mount Hope Cemetery, built on a glacial moraine. The architecture of the monuments here reflects the lumber wealth of the 19th century, but the geology is pure Ice Age debris. The air is hushed and smells of old stone and shaded hemlock. In the Penobscot Valley, the shattered mirror of the coast is replaced by a silver ribbon. The river is the pulse of the region, a geological and cultural artery that connects the high peaks we will eventually climb to the ocean we have just left behind. The history of the Penobscot Valley is etched into the river itself. For the Penobscot Nation, whose ancestral home is Indian Island, just north of Bangor, the river is not a resource, it is a relative. Known as the Penobscot, it was the great highway of the north. The sound of this era was the soft shoosh of birch bark canoes and the splashing of millions of Atlantic salmon returning to spawn. The air smelled of wood smoke and the sweet grassy scent of the riverbanks. This was a culture of sophisticated ecology where the river's health was synonymous with the people's survival. By the mid-1800s, the soundscape exploded into a cacophony of industrial ambition. Bangor became the lumber capital of the world. The sound was the thunderous crack of ice breaking in the spring, followed by the roar of millions of logs clogging the river in massive drives. The air smelled of freshly sawn white pine and the pungent, oily scent of the sawmills. The architecture of this era remains in the Broadway Historic District, where lumber baron mansions, built with the profits of the forest, display a staggering array of Victorian, Italianate, and Second Empire styles. A key activity for the modern traveler is a visit to the Thomas Hill Standpipe. Built in 1897, this shingle-style water tower is a masterpiece of utilitarian architecture. From its heights, you can hear the city below and see the river winding north. The air is thinner here, smelling of dry wood and iron. Another essential destination is the Paul Bunyan statue, a 31-foot-tall nod to the folklore of the woods. The culture here is North Country tough, a blend of rugged outdoor expertise and a deep pride in the city's identity as the gateway to the north. This is also the literary home of Stephen King. The wrought iron bat and spider fence of his home has become a cultural landmark where the air feels a bit more atmospheric and the shadows of the old pines seem a bit longer. The modern culture is one of river restoration. Following the removal of the Great Works and VZ dams, the river is breathing again. The sound of the current era is the splash of a leaping sturgeon, a sound that has been missing for over a century. As we depart Bangor, we head northwest along the Golden Road corridor. The city lights fade, and the green wall of the North Woods begins to close in. The horizon is no longer flat. The distant blue ghost of the mountains is reappearing. We are leaving the river valley for the inland sea of the north. Our next destination is Moosehead Lake and Mount Kineo, where the scale of the wilderness becomes absolute. As we push deeper into the North Woods, the scale of the world shifts. The road narrows, the trees grow taller, and suddenly the forest opens up to reveal Moosehead Lake, a massive 40-mile-long inland sea that dominates the Maine interior. The air here is a sharp, refreshing departure from the valley. It is boreal air, oxygen-rich and cold, smelling of balsam fir, damp moss, and the clean mineral scent of deep lake water. The soundscape is vast and quiet, dominated by the lap of water against ancient stone and the haunting, tremolo call of the common loon. The geology of this region is defined by a singular, staggering anomaly, Mount Kineo. Rising 700 feet vertically from the deepest part of the lake, Kineo is not made of granite or schist, but of Kineo rhyolite, specifically a type of flinty volcanic rock. This is the largest mass of rhyolite in the eastern United States. Formed during the Devonian period, it is a fine-grained, glass-like volcanic stone that is incredibly hard. This hardness allowed it to survive the crushing weight of the glaciers, which carved the surrounding land into the deep basin of the lake, while leaving Kineo standing as a sheer, impenetrable peninsula. Your first impression of the lake is one of wild gravity. The sheer mass of the water, over 200 feet deep in places, creates a microclimate that can generate sudden, ocean-like squalls. The sound of the environment is the thrum of the wind as it accelerates over the open water and hits the vertical face of Kineo. The temperature here is a cold sink. Even in the height of summer, the deep water keeps the surface air brisk, smelling of wet flint and ancient pine. A critical destination is the Kineo Cliff Trail. As you stand at the base of the flint cliffs, you can see the distinctive gray-green hue of the rock. The sound here is a sharp, percussive echo. Every snap of a twig or splash of water bounces off the vertical stone wall. Another essential stop is Lily Bay State Park, where the geology is softer, consisting of glacial till and sandy beaches. Here, the air is warmer, held by the sheltered coves, and smells of sun-warmed needles and sweet myrtle. At Moosehead, the shattered mirror of the coast has been replaced by a granite basin. It is a landscape that feels older than the coast, a place where the Earth's volcanic past and its glacial present are locked in a permanent, silent standoff. The history of Moosehead Lake is etched in flint. For over 11,000 years, Mount Kineo was the most important industrial site in the Northeast for the Wabanaki people. The specific Kineo rhyolite found here possesses a conchoidal fracture, meaning it flakes like glass into razor-sharp edges. The sound of this era was the rhythmic clink of stone knapping, as indigenous hunters crafted projectile points and tools that have been found as far south as the Carolinas. The air smelled of wood smoke and the sharp metallic dust of worked stone. This was a culture of lithic mastery, where the mountain was a sacred gift of technology. By the mid-1800s, the soundscape shifted to the hiss of steam and the thump of grand construction. Moosehead became the frontier of the Gilded Age wilderness. The Mount Kineo House, once the largest inland waterfront hotel in America, brought thousands of rusticators to the lake's edge. The air smelled of coal smoke from the lake steamers and the sweet, expensive perfume of Victorian travelers. The architecture of this era was defined by great camp aesthetics, massive log structures with sprawling porches designed to take in the mountain air. This was the era of the steamship Katahdin, whose low-frequency whistle still echoes across the water today. A key activity for the modern traveler is a journey aboard the Kate. As you stand on her wooden decks, the smell is a nostalgic blend of diesel, old timber, and the cold, ozone scent of the open lake. The culture here is Northwoods traditional, a world of registered Maine guides, seaplane pilots, and sporting camps. It is a community that values self-reliance and the ability to read the sky for incoming weather. Another essential destination is the Greenville Seaplane Base. The sound here is the roar and splash of de Havilland beavers taking off, a mechanical heartbeat that connects the town to the trackless wilderness of the North Maine woods. The modern culture is one of permanent wilderness. Large tracts of land surrounding the lake are now protected under the Moosehead Lake Region Conservation Easement, ensuring that the dark skies of the north remain unpolluted by light. The sound of the current era is the silent, ethereal crack of the northern lights during high solar activity, a visual symphony that reflects off the mirror-still water. As we depart Greenville, we head west-southwest toward the Dead River region. The inland sea disappears in the rearview mirror as the terrain becomes increasingly vertical. The rounded hills of the valley are replaced by the jagged, snow-capped serrations of the high country. We are leaving the deep waters for the thin air of the summits. Our next destination is the high peaks and Rangeley, where the Appalachian spine of Maine reaches its most rugged heights. As we leave the deep basins of the North Woods, the road begins to coil like a serpent. We are ascending into the High Peaks region, the rugged spine of the Appalachian Mountains in Maine. The arrival is a sensory shift. The air loses the heavy, damp lake scent of Moosehead and becomes thin, sharp, and intensely cold, smelling of high-elevation spruce and the metallic, dry fragrance of exposed mica. The soundscape is dominated by the Aeolian harp, the constant, high-velocity wind whistling through the stunted needles of the ridgelines. The geology of the Rangeley region is a story of immense tectonic collision. We are standing on the Rangeley Formation, a complex assemblage of Silurian metasedimentary rocks, primarily staurolite schist and gneiss. These mountains were forged during the Acadian orogeny roughly 400 million years ago, when an ancient landmass slammed into North America, crumpling the Earth's crust into the massive folds we see today. The high peaks are the hardened roots of this collision. Unlike the rounded hills to the south, these mountains are jagged and steep, carved by the plucking action of the glaciers that left behind massive cirques, amphitheater-like valleys, and U-shaped notches. Your first impression of the Rangeley Lakes is one of elevated serenity. From the famous height of land overlook on Route 17, the geography of Maine is laid bare. You are looking down from 2,000 feet onto Moosehead and Richardson Lakes. The sound here is a solitary, rushing gale that seems to carry no human noise, only the hiss of the wind over the granite rim. The temperature at this elevation can be 15 degrees cooler than the valleys below, smelling of dry lichen and the ozone of an approaching mountain storm. A critical destination for understanding this vertical world is Saddleback Mountain. Here, the geology is exposed in alpine tundra zones. Above the tree line, The ground is covered in diapensia and Lapland rosebay, hardy survivors of the Ice Age. The sound is a low, vibratory thrum of the wind hitting the mountain's shoulder. Another essential stop is Coos Canyon, where the swift river has carved deep potholes into the metamorphic bedrock. Here, the air is warmer, held by the stone walls, and smells of sun-bleached river rock and wild mint. In the high peaks, the shattered mirror of the coast and the inland sea of the woods have been replaced by a stone fortress. It is a landscape of vertical extremes, where the deep-time pressure of the Earth's core meets the relentless erosion of the sky. The history of the high peaks is a narrative of the sacred high ground. For the Wabanaki, these mountains were the home of powerful spirits and provided a vital network of alpine trails connecting the watersheds. The sound of this era was the rhythmic chink of stone tools against river cobbles and the whistling of the wind through the high-altitude birches. The temperature of this history is found in the permafrost pockets of the high ravines, where the air stays cold enough to preserve the feeling of a world still emerging from the ice. By the late 1800s, the soundscape shifted to the splash of heavy oars and the zip of silk fishing lines. Rangeley became the global epicenter for brook trout and landlocked salmon fishing. The architecture of this era was defined by the grand hotels and specialized sporting camps, structures like the Rangeley Lake House, which featured wide wraparound porches and high ceilings to capture the mountain breezes. The air smelled of wood smoke, wet wool, and the fish oil scent of early waterproofing treatments. This was the era of the Rangeley boat, a unique double-ended wooden rowing boat designed to handle the sudden, choppy, square waves of the high-altitude lakes. A key activity for the modern traveler is a visit to the Outdoor Heritage Museum in Oquasac. Here, the culture is preserved in the form of world-class fly-tying displays and the legendary Rangeley flies of Carrie Stevens. The air inside is still and smells of cedar and old lacquer. The culture here is upland traditional, a community that values the quiet sports and possesses a deep, generational knowledge of the forest floor and the trout stream. Another essential destination is the Wilhelm Reich Museum, Organon. This eccentric stone observatory, built in the 1940s, represents a fascinating architectural transition into mid-century modernist experimentation. The sound here is a hushed, academic silence, and the air smells of mountain pine and the cold, sterile scent of the stone laboratory. The modern culture is one of alpine preservation. With the expansion of the Appalachian Trail and the protection of the Crocker Mountain summit, the high peaks have become a sanctuary for through hikers and conservationists. The sound of the current era is the rhythmic clack of trekking poles on granite, a human tempo that respects the scale of the mountains. As we depart Rangeley, we head north-northeast toward our final, most sacred destination. The road descends slightly from the high plateau, and the mountains ahead begin to consolidate into a single, massive, isolated monolith. The high peaks are beautiful, but what lies ahead is the greatest mountain, the northern terminus of the Appalachian Spirit. Our final destination is Baxter State Park and Katahdin, the crown of the Maine wilderness. We have reached the northern terminus of our journey, the spiritual and physical crown of Maine. Entering Baxter State Park is a transition into a primeval shield. The air here is noticeably different. It is heavy, with the scent of black spruce and the cold, damp exhales of glacial tarns. The temperature is governed by the mountain's massive shadow. Even in midsummer, an Arctic chill clings to the forest floor. The soundscape is dominated by a profound, heavy silence, occasionally punctuated by the crack of a snapping branch or the distant roaring whoosh of the wind high above the tree line. The geology of Mount Katahdin is a monumental departure from the coastal granite and valley schists we've encountered. This is the Katahdin Pluton, a massive body of Devonian granite that intruded into the Earth's crust roughly 400 million years ago. Unlike the pink granites of Acadia, the granite here is often a weathered, light gray, composed of coarse crystals of quartz and feldspar. It is an isostasy marvel, a landmass so heavy and hard that it stayed high while the surrounding landscape was eroded away by millions of years of weather. The true architect of Katahdin's current form, however, was the alpine glaciation. While the continental ice sheet rounded the southern hills, local mountain glaciers carved deep, dramatic cirques into the sides of the massif. This created the knife edge, a terrifyingly narrow arete, a sharp mountain ridge, where the granite has been ground down from both sides until it is only a few feet wide. The landscape here is a Felsenmeer, a German term meaning sea of rocks, where the freeze-thaw cycle has shattered the summit granite into a chaotic jumble of angular blocks. Two specific destinations illustrate this geological violence. First is the chimney, a vertical cleft in the granite where the sound is a haunting, fluting whistle as the wind is squeezed through the narrow stone gap. The air here smells of cold iron and wet lichen. Second is Chimney Pond, a sapphire blue tarn sitting in the shadow of a 2,000-foot vertical cliff known as the Great Basin. Standing at the water's edge, the sound is a low-frequency echo of the wind, booming against the granite amphitheater. The temperature here is a constant refrigerator cool, holding the scent of ancient ice and pristine minerals. Katahdin, meaning the greatest mountain in the Penobscot language, is not just a peak. It is a geological fortress. It is a place where the deep-time fire of the Earth's core has been sculpted by the relentless ice of the heavens, creating a landscape that feels both eternal and dangerously alive. As we ascend the slopes of Katahdin, we are performing a latitudinal leap. Moving from the park gates to the summit is biologically equivalent to traveling from Maine to the high Arctic tundra of northern Quebec. the air transitions from the resinous, heavy scent of the lowland hardwood forest to the sharp and thin fragrance of the boreal zone. The soundscape here is a descending scale. The complex bird chorus of the valleys fades, replaced by the solitary, high-pitched tseet of the blackpoll warbler and the clack of the common raven circling the granite cliffs. The most striking ecological feature is the Krummholz, German for twisted wood. Near the tree line, balsam fir and black spruce are transformed by the relentless wind and ice into horizontal mats of wood. These trees may be 100 years old, yet stand only knee-high, their needles flagged to the leeward side. The air in these thickets is surprisingly warm and still, smelling intensely of pine pitch and damp moss, acting as a final shelter for the Bicknell's thrush, a rare bird that thrives only in these high-altitude, wind-battered islands of green. Above the tree line lies the alpine tundra, a fragile 1,000-acre plateau that is a relic of the last ice age. Here, the soil is merely a thin layer of peat held in the cracks of the Katahdin granite. The flora consists of diapensia, alpine bilberry, and the Bigelow's sedge. These plants are cushion formers, hugging the warm rocks to avoid the desiccating wind. The temperature here can drop below freezing even in August, and the air carries a sterile quality, devoid of pollen and heavy organic scents, smelling instead of cold rain and dry lichen. Two specific biological encounters define this wilderness. First is the moose. In the marshy deadwaters of the sandy stream pond, these giants move with a silent, ghostly grace through the muck. The sound is a heavy slosh crunch as they pull lilies from the bottom, and the air smells of stagnant water and wet fur. Second is the Katahdin Arctic butterfly. This species is found nowhere else on Earth. It lives its entire life in the Felsenmeer of the summit, its translucent brown wings perfectly camouflaged against the gray-orange lichen of the stones. To see one is to see a living ghost of the Pleistocene. In Baxter, the ecology is a lesson in extreme patience. From the century-old stunted fir to the butterfly that only flies in the sun, life here has adapted to a world where the margin for error is as thin as the mountain air itself. The history of Mount Katahdin is one of profound reverence and a singular man's obsession. For the Penobscot Nation, Katahdin is not just a mountain, it is the physical manifestation of the sacred. It is the home of Pamola, the storm spirit with the head of a moose, the body of a man, and the wings and feet of an eagle. The sound of this era was a respectful silence. Traditionally, the Wabanaki did not climb above the tree line out of respect for the spirits of the high plateau. The air of this history is charged with the electric crackle of approaching summer thunderstorms, which were seen as the movements of Pamola himself. The modern history of the park is synonymous with Percival Baxter, the two-term Maine governor who dedicated his life and fortune to creating this wilderness. After the state legislature repeatedly refused to buy the land from paper companies, Baxter bought it himself, piece by piece, and deeded it to the people of Maine with the ironclad condition that it remain forever wild. The architecture of this legacy is found in the hand-built log cabins at Roaring Brook and Chimney Pond. Built during the Great Depression by the Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, these structures use massive spruce logs and native granite. The air inside smells of decades of wood smoke, linseed oil, and old wool, while the sound is the low, steady rush of the nearby mountain streams. Two specific historical landmarks ground this journey. First is the final terminus of the Appalachian Trail at the summit of Baxter Peak. Since its completion in the 1930s, this wooden sign has become a relic of endurance. The sound here is a chorus of heavy breathing, celebratory shouts, and the clack of trekking poles hitting the summit stone. The air smells of sweat and granite, a testament to the 2,190-mile journey that ends here. Second is Governor's Spring, a high-altitude water source where the water emerges from the granite at a constant, bone-chilling temperature. The sound is a delicate clink trickle, and the taste is the pure mineral essence of the mountain's deep-time filtration. This is a history of transition from commodity to sanctuary. In the 1800s, this land was viewed as a timber resource to be harvested. Today, it is a geological and spiritual reserve, where the only thing harvested is perspective. As we stand on the summit, we are looking at a landscape that remains exactly as it was 10,000 years ago, a rare victory for deep time in a fast-moving world. The architecture of Baxter State Park is a deliberate exercise in invisibility. Unlike the grand, conspicuous cottages of the coast or the Victorian mansions of Bangor, the structures here are designed to dissolve into the forest. Following Percival Baxter's Forever Wild mandate, there are no paved roads, no electricity, and no running water within the park's interior. The aesthetic is rustic functionalism, log lean-tos and ranger stations built from local eastern hemlock and spruce, their footings made of unquarried mountain granite. The air around these structures smells of cold ash and damp earth, with the sharp, resinous top note of fresh firewood. The soundscape is the Baxter silence, a heavy, velvety quiet that is so profound it makes the ears ring, broken only by the hiss of a propane lantern or the rhythmic thud of an axe at a designated woodpile. The culture of Baxter is one of ascetic stewardship. It is a community of gatekeepers, the rangers, and seekers, the hikers. To enter Baxter is to enter a contract with the mountain. There is a culture of quiet competence. The respect is given not to the fastest climber, but to the one who leaves no trace. This is the birthplace of the Maine guide ethos in its purest form, a blend of humility, obsessive preparation, and a deep red of the mountain's shifting moods. Two specific cultural nodes define this final destination. First is the Dacey Pond Library, Housed in a small rustic log cabin, it contains a collection of nature writing and park history. The sound here is the creak of old floorboards and the soft turn of a page. The air smells of vanilla-scented old paper and cedar. It represents the intellectual side of the wilderness, the idea that the mountain is a place for reflection as much as exertion. Second is the Abbey Museum's influence here, where the cultural presence of the Penobscot is acknowledged not as history, but as a continuous, living connection to the land. The most iconic cultural ritual, however, is the summit registration. In the small metal boxes at the trailheads, hikers sign their names and intentions. Reading these entries, you feel the collective weight of human hope and exhaustion. The culture of Katahdin is a shared understanding that, on this mountain, human ego is secondary to the granite. The legacy of Baxter State Park is a profound rejection of the shattered mirror of modern development. It stands as a geological anchor, a place where the landscape remains a constant in an era of rapid change. Percival Baxter's vision was not just to save a mountain, but to preserve a specific feeling, the raw, unvarnished encounter between a human and the primeval earth. The legacy here is one of inviolability. It is the only place in Maine where the land is truly the master, and we are merely its temporary, silent guests. As we stand on the summit of Baxter Peak, the transition is one of perspective. From this vantage point, you can see the entire geography of your journey laid out in miniature. To the south, the silver ribbons of the Penobscot and the blue glimmer of Moosehead Lake. To the east, the vast green carpet of the North Woods, and far on the horizon, a hazy line that marks the beginning of the Atlantic coast. The sound is the universal hum of the wind, a sound that has not changed since the glaciers retreated. The air is the purest it will ever be, tasting of snow and sky. This marks the end of our expedition through the shattered mirror. We have moved from the shifting sands of the south, through the fractured granite islands of the coast, up the industrial arteries of the rivers, and finally into the static, frozen fire of the high peaks. However, your growth doesn't end at the summit. Just as the Kineo rhyolite survived the ice and the balsam fir adapted to the wind, you have integrated these landscapes into your own internal geography. That is the story of Maine, a place where the land doesn't just sit, it endures. We've traveled the length of this shattered mirror coastline, from the shifting sands of the south to the granite citadels of Acadia. We've followed the silver veins of the Penobscot deep into the North Woods, through the inland seas of Moosehead, and up into the thin, sharp air of the high peaks. And finally, we stood on the summit of Katahdin, where the earth meets the sky in a silence that has lasted since the ice retreated. If there is a takeaway from this journey, it's that Maine isn't just one landscape. It is a mosaic of fire and ice, a state defined by the deep time of its rocks and the resilient spirit of the people, from the Wabanaki to the lumber barons, who learned to live within its harsh constraints. It is a place that teaches us that resilience isn't just about strength. It's about understanding that we are part of a seasonal rhythm, moving with the tides, the berries, and the snow. A little practical advice before we close the map. Maine rewards the traveler who slows down. Give yourself fewer destinations and more time to listen to the clack of the seawall or the haunting call of a loon. Start early, respect the mountain's moods, and let the silence have a slot in your schedule. It's a vital part of what you came here to find. Thank you for joining us on Trails for the Wonders of Maine. If this journey through the Dawnland meant something to you, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep making documentaries that slow down and actually look at the why behind the view. You'll see more curated recommendations from our Wonders of series on your screen now. Feel free to jump into another trail or save them for a quiet evening when you need the road in your head. Until next time, travel safe, take care of the wild places that take care of you, and good wishes on the trail.